Hello，你好，Welcome back，欢迎回来to Wisdom Wednesday with Johnny Tiger on Wednesday, June 5th, 2024. Did you know that Johnny Tiger used to be a Buddhist? Yeah, when I was growing up. It's not like I actually chose to be Buddhist. I was brought up as a Buddhist. I was brought to the Buddhist temple and have to go through all the ceremonies and prayers and took part in some very grueling uh, events where you have to worship and get down on your knees and kowtow, put your head to the ground and do that all the way up the mountain. Like, can you guys imagine that? Like, it, people talk about pilgrimage like it's something really difficult. Like when you're a Buddhist, uh, sometimes you have to go on this pilgrimage and you got to go climb up the mountain, and every three steps you have to get down on your knee and worship, and get up and walk 3 steps and get down on your knee and worship. I'm not even kidding about that. Like I had to do that so many times when I was a child, because I was told that I had to do it, and it typically would take hours. Like it would take almost a whole day. Uh, and usually with an entire group of people doing it together, and you work your way up to the top of the mountain where the monastery was, and then you finally get there, and they have food ready for you. So I guess that's like your reward. Luckily, the tour bus would pick you up, so you don't have to do that back down the mountain. So I remember, I still have kind of like PTSD from that, like growing up in Taiwan, doing that in weather like 90 to 100-degree Fahrenheit weather in the daytime, doing that all the way up the mountain. Whew, yeah, Buddhism can be kind of crazy sometimes. So it is in the spirit of that PTSD about being a Buddhist that I'm going to talk about the 4 times in Chinese history that Buddhism almost got purged from China. Uh, Now, a lot of people, especially Westerners, have this idea that Chinese people are against religion, or that Chinese people don't have faith. Well, first, it's not so much that Chinese people are against religion. It's that to Chinese people, religion is not supposed to come before law and government. That's all. It's not like it's not so. It's not that you're not allowed to practice your religion, but practice it on your own time at home. So you can't take it to school. You can't practice it at work. Everyone's religion is okay as long as you keep it to yourself. I think that's fair. I kind of feel that if you really believe in your God or your prophet or something, I don't have any problem with it, but don't wave it in my face. Don't try to convince me. Just do it on your own time. I don't have any problem. So, like, honestly, I don't really think that Chinese people are so much as against religion, more like we don't like to have everybody's religion rubbed in our face uh, all the time. So, you want to be religious, that's fine. Just do it at home. Um, Secondly, as far as Chinese people don't have faith, that's not true because we do. It's just we don't attribute the same amount of faith to God or Jesus or Buddha as other religion, other races, other cultures seem to do. Our faith go number one to country, aka patriotism, and number two to family, to our loved one, and then to our friends, and then to our neighbors, and last to religion. Okay, so it's not that we don't have faith, it's just we have different priority. Chinese people have had society long before Chinese people had religion. For thousands of years, Chinese people were without gods, without religion, without Buddha. We worshipped our ancestors. We worshipped our uh, heroes, our warriors. So you can say that Chinese people pay tribute and worship to real people that passed on, rather than some possibly fictitious or uh, legendary gods like Jade Emperor or stuff like that. So those came actually later in Chinese history. So Chinese people started without religion. So this is why in the Chinese culture, religion is not quite as important as in many other culture. Our first duty is usually to the country and to family, but that's our faith. If we have to respect your faith, then why can't you respect that that is our faith, right? So anyway, that's just to lay the groundwork for uh, what I'm going to be talking about. Because it is quite interesting when you look at Chinese culture as opposed to, let's say, the Muslim culture or the Catholic or Christian culture, uh, in the Greco-Roman culture. In most of these culture, you see that religious figures were always more powerful than government leader, political leaders. So the Pope was more powerful than the emperor. The prophet was more powerful than the leader or the general, and so on. But this has not been the case in Chinese people, because by the time religion was developed for Chinese people at the time of Taoism, so that was about the time of Lao Tzu, Li Er. We talked about him in one past episode. Um, so when Lao Tzu developed religion for Chinese people, that was roughly 3,000, 2,800 years ago. So prior to that, Chinese people have already had 2,000, 3,000 years of governing themselves without needing a religious figure. So by the time religion came to Chinese people in the form of Taoism, and then later in the form of Buddhism, Chinese people already were used to, as the emperor was the ultimate authority. So it doesn't matter how important or how impressive God or Buddha or Jade Emperor was. Uh, when it came to crunch time, when push came to shove, the Chinese emperor was the ultimate say so. What he said goes. He was basically the ultimate authority. So it's very different from most other cultures and countries throughout human history. Unfortunately, just like most other religions, Buddhism works on subverting believers, subverting other people's believers, other people's followers into following them. And that is how most religions around the world work. Is the more people we can get to sign on, the better, the more powerful we are, right? And Buddhism works the same way. And like many other religions, Buddhists and the monks and the nuns had either intentionally or unintentionally tried to push the boundary of societal and political leaders throughout Chinese history. And unfortunately for them, it didn't work out very good for them. And today, we are going to look at the four times in Chinese history when Buddhism almost got completely purged from China. Yeah, and you think you thought the crusade was bad. So, interestingly enough, three out of the four times, the emperors that did the purging were all martial emperors. What do I mean by martial emperors? When you look at the emperor's titles and emperor's names throughout Chinese history, for example, Tang Wu Wang or Tang Ming Wang or King Shi Wang or Tang Taizong, that middle syllable, the Te or the Wu, the Wang, the Shi, those middle syllables, that's not part of their name. In fact, the whole name, that's what you're hearing, the Qin Shi Wan or Tang Te Zong or Tang Wu Zong, these are not the actual name of the emperor. These are the official title given to these emperor to denote or to mark how they were as emperors. It's sort of like a marker for historians to follow. So, for example, Tang Taizong, while he was an emperor, he wasn't known as Tang Taizong. This artifact only got put on after the fact, after he passed on, and people want to remember him. And so here is a little bit of trivia, although this is a little bit deep dive into Chinese imperial history that most of you probably don't even need to remember this, but it is interesting. Okay, by looking at the middle syllable, uh, so the first syllable, King, Tang, Song, that denotes the dynasty, the name of the dynasty. Okay, so all the emperor from the Tang dynasty, their title would start with Tang. That's not their family name. Okay, their actual family name is Li. Uh, so the first letter, the first syllable is the dynasty. Okay, the middle syllable we'll get come back to that. The last syllable, the Wang means king or emperor. The Zong means ancestor or emperor. So the last syllable is just a respectful affixation on what they are, the emperor, the king, the great ruler, or whatever. Okay, so you have Tang Te Zong, right? Tang is the dynasty, and the Zong is great ancestor, great leader, great emperor. Um, Te, in this case, Te means peace, peaceful. Okay, Tang Te Zong means the peaceful emperor of Tang Dynasty. That's what they translate to. So that's not that. Unlike what a lot of people think, Tang Taizong is not his name. That's just what historians and descendants call him to remember him by. Okay, and if you look at Chinese history, you can always see uh, just by the name, especially that middle syllable. You can go by that middle syllable, and you'll know uh, how this king or emperor was remembered or thought of or marked by historian. Okay, any uh, emperor or king or leader with a middle syllable tai means peaceful, or ming means greatness, intelligent, or wu means martial. So anyone with Ming or Wu or Tei uh, were really great. Like these were the greatest emperors that only the really great ones ended up with Tei or Ming or Wu. Okay, and if the if the middle end up with Shi, uh, or Wang or Hui, uh, some of those like basically means they weren't very good. They were either tyrant or they didn't do shit. Okay, so it's quite interesting that when you look at the middle syllables, you can instantly know uh, what kind of emperor this person was and how they rank in if they were a good emperor or not. So as I already said, the one with the middle affectation of Wu means martial. So martial emperors, they were warrior kings, warrior emperors. They were uh, usually ranked among the best, best of the best. Uh, and three of these Wu emperors, three of these martial emperors tried to purge Buddhism from Chinese people. Was that a coincidence, or just because Buddhism was totally opposite to the way of the warrior? Hmm, maybe we'll figure out as we go through today's history lesson or little story time. The first great purge for Buddhism happened in year 438, in year 438, during the Northern Wei dynasty. Okay, so not many people outside of Chinese culture know about the Northern Wei dynasty. It didn't last very long. It's not a very big dynasty. But to put it in context for you guys, we've talked about the romance of the Three Kingdoms, the War of the Three Kingdoms, the Kingdom of Wei, Kingdom of Shu, Kingdom of Wu. So basically, long story short, in the end, the Kingdom of Wei defeated the Kingdom of Shu and Wu and united China under the Dynasty of Wei. And then the Dynasty of Wei fractured and got taken over by the Dynasty of Jin. And the Jin Dynasty ruled for like almost 90 to 100 years, but then the descendants of Wei took it back and formed the Northern Wei dynasty. Sound chaotic? Yeah, it was chaotic. Okay, so you don't need to remember all most of that. It's just like a really chaotic time in Chinese history where the dynasty was changing every 40, 50, 60 years. And there's a lot of warring states and little kingdoms sprouting up all over the place. So going to the Northern Wei dynasty, Northern Wei dynasty, year 438. Um, the martial emperor of Wei dynasty, Tuo Batao, uh, was a really great warrior, and at the at that time, there were three other kingdoms that were fighting against the Northern Wei for ruling power of China. So there's four kingdoms in total fighting each other, and the martial emperor of Northern Wei, Tuo Batao, he decided to marshal a great force to build a great army uh, and go forward to defeat the other three kingdoms. Now, immediately, he realized that he ran into a problem because at the time of the uh, the emperor's plan to build the army, almost over half of the Northern Wei dynasty's population were Buddhist. So here the emperor was trying to build a great army, and no one would join the army because being Buddhist means you're a pacifist. Being Buddhist means killing anything, including a cockroach, is a sin. You kill a cockroach, you might come back and reincarnate as a cockroach. Nobody wants to reincarnate as a cockroach. So no one wants to pick up a sword or an axe and go onto the battlefield. So after a year of trying to recruit people for his great army, I mean, you can imagine how frustrating this was for the martial king, martial emperor of Northern Wei. Here he was, one of the greatest general, one of the greatest warrior of his time. He had great tactics, he was great on the battlefield, but he couldn't put together an army to lead into battle because no one wanted to join the military. And everybody when was becoming Buddhist, so he got very frustrated. And at the same time, his prime minister, the guy's name was Chang Hao. Chang Hao was a follower of Confucius. Now, in case you guys don't know this, Confucius did not believe in Buddha or God. Confucius believed that this life is the only life that you should worry about. This life is the best life. You should spend your time worrying about making your life, making your person the best there is. And the hell with the afterlife. There's no afterlife. Don't worry about it. So that so being a follower, a disciple of Confucius philosophy, Chang Hao hated Buddhism because he saw that all these people that should be studying Confucianism and scholarship and stuff like that, wasting their time reading prayers and reading the Buddha's Bible and counting the rosary beads and all that stuff. So he hated Buddhist. So when he heard how Emperor Tuobatao was so mad at the Buddhist for not joining his army, this was his opportunity. So Cheng Hao went to the emperor and said, Your Majesty, we need to do something about these Buddhists because if you don't do something decisive right now, they are going to be the ruin. They are going to be the ruin of your dynasty. Right? If we don't have an army, the other kingdoms going to invade and they are going to take over, and we won't be able to even defend ourselves. So that pushed the emperor into enabling and instigating the first ever big purge of Buddhists in Chinese history. And how he went about that was to burn down as many Buddhist temples as he could, while uh, he would he in put in a new law. So traditionally, if you were a monk or a nun, you didn't have to serve in the military because that's against your religious right. You know, you're supposed to be a pacifist, like I mentioned just a minute ago. So Emperor Tuobatao input a new law that okay, anybody from now on, anybody, any monk or nun under the age of 50 will automatically be cancelled. Their priesthood or their monkdom or their religious right will be automatically cancelled, and they are automatically enlisted into the military. If you survive in the military uh, to you're 50 or older, then congratulations, you're free to go back to be a monk or nun. Okay, you've served your time. But if you're younger than 50 years old, sorry, the law said you can't be a monk. You have to go into the military. So he basically had his military went around and arrested all the monks and nuns that were younger than 50 years old and pressed them into service by force. So this uh, was such a successful movement. Like some of you listening to this will say, "Wow, that's so against human rights. That's so inhumane." But you know what? It was immensely effective because after he did that, his army got so big and so powerful that in no time at all, the Northern Wei dynasty defeated all the other three kingdoms and reunited Chinese people under one banner. Granted, it didn't last very long, but for a short time, the martial emperor of the Northern Wei dynasty reunited Chinese people under one banner, and he did that by instigating the first big purge of Buddhism from Chinese people. Incidentally, and sadly, uh, the son of Tuobatao, the martial emperor of Northern Wei dynasty, the prince was a devout Buddhist. So when his father did this big Buddhism purge, the prince got really depressed and basically died of depression at the age of 24. And after the emperor passed away, because his son passed away before him, so the grandson, the son of the prince, came into power, and to honor his father's memory and his father's Buddhist practice, the new emperor, the grandson, brought Buddhism back and undid all the laws that the martial emperor put in. And shortly afterward, the Northern Wei dynasty got destroyed. Was it because of Buddhism? We can't really say that one way or another, but we can say that maybe he shouldn't have done it that way. Maybe he should have kept the restriction going and keep the military strong a little bit longer, and maybe the Northern Wei dynasty wouldn't have fallen into ruin. Fast forward from the end of the Northern Wei dynasty by about 100 years. So we are looking at year 500 or so. Um, Now China was under the rule of the first Zhou dynasty. Now, what do I mean by first Zhou dynasty? Because like the Wei dynasty, the Zhou dynasty was sort of split in half. So the Zhou dynasty sort of ruled for a little bit, and then the Tang dynasty took over, and Tang dynasty was what like basically the greatest dynasty of the entire Chinese history. And then by the time the Tang dynasty started going downhill and started to fall apart, the second Zhou dynasty kind of happened because the descendant of the first Zhou dynasty took it back, took the power back, and ruled for a little bit longer before Song dynasty happened. Okay? So that's just a little bit of a reference for the way the timeline how it went down. You guys don't have to memorize that. It's not going to be an exam or a quiz later. Um, so we're now looking at the first Zhou dynasty, and the Zhou dynasty's martial emperor Zhou Wuzong also was a great warrior. Like I mentioned before, usually if they have Wu in the middle of their title, they were like martial warrior kings, and they were like really great emperors. So Zhou Wuzong, the martial emperor of the first Zhou dynasty, uh, was doing really well, defending his borders and protecting his people from all the other kingdoms and invaders. But he was starting to run out of money. Uh, and he was trying to figure out where is the problem? I'm doing so well. My warriors are so great. Why are we running out of resources? And he started looking over the ledgers, the tax forms, and stuff like that himself. And he very quickly realized where the problem was: Buddhism. So why was Buddhism a problem? Okay, by this time, don't forget, about 100 years prior, when the grandson of the martial emperor of Wei dynasty brought Buddhism back and undid all the laws that his grandfather put in. So now Buddhists were free to practice and did whatever they wanted again. So in 100 years, Buddhists have not only recovered from the first purge, they gotten bigger. There's more of them. Um, Now, a lot of you might not know this, but being a monk or a nun, there's only two sources of income, like traditionally speaking. you have two sources of income. One, people who come to the monastery, they would leave a donation when they are praying or when they are asking you for your guidance and stuff like that. They can donate to the temple, to the monastery. And the second form is you send your monks and your nun out and knock on doors and talk to people about your religion and ask them if they like to give some money to help you build a new statue or uh, fix your roof and stuff like that. So basically, it comes down to the two forms of income came from donation or begging, right? It doesn't sound as very good, but it was basically begging because you're knocking on people's door asking for money. Um, Neither of these uh, income sources was taxable. We talked about this in a past episode, long time ago, that monks and nuns were getting really, really, really rich. In Chinese history, they were the first loan sharks in Chinese history. Like they were so rich that even emperors had to borrow money from them. And most of that is because they didn't have to pay tax. At first, this was sort of offset by the government would tax the other civilians more to make up the difference. But this created a vicious circle because monks were not paying taxes. So the government add more taxes onto the other civilians. And the more and more civilians were becoming monks because that way they could avoid paying taxes. So it just creates a downward spiral. And when the martial emperor of the first Zhou dynasty took over, he realized this was the issue. So many of his citizens were not paying taxes because they were monks or nuns. And so that's why the government was not getting enough income. So, uh, in desperation, he implemented the second great purge of Buddhism in Chinese history. He ordered to have over 400,000 monasteries burned down to the ground, their land returned to the government, and the monks and the nuns go back to commoner status and have to pay all the back taxes they owe to the government, and that solved the financial crisis that the government was facing at the time. Uh, Quite interesting was the fact that the martial emperor himself was a Buddhist, and a lot of his ministers were Buddhist. So when he implemented this new policy to burn down the monasteries, to seize the land, and to force these monks and nuns to pay back taxes, his ministers were really against it, and a lot of them were saying to the emperor, "Your Majesty, you can't do that because Buddha is going to punish you. If you do this, the Buddha is going to make you go to hell for eternity." And the emperor said something that very famous, something that one of the more famous quotes by Chinese emperors. He said, as long as it saves my kingdom and make my people happy and healthy and have a good life, I don't mind spending eternity in hell. Yeah, badass, right? Okay, so that was the second Great Purge. So the first Great Purge happened because Buddhists were pacifist and was messing up the military because no one wanted to be in the military. The second Great Purge happened because Buddhists were not paying taxes and it was messing up the country's finance. We go forward another two, maybe 300 years to the end of the Tang Dynasty, and that's when the third Great Purge happened at the end of Tang Wuzong, the martial emperor of Tang Dynasty. the Emperor Li Yuan. Now, this was actually very ironic because Tang Dynasty was the dynasty that Buddhism was at its greatest in Chinese history. Those of you that remember the story of the journey west, uh, it was the first emperor of the Tang Dynasty, Tang Taizong, and Tang Xuanzang. Those two emperors that sent the great monk uh, uh, Tang Shanzang to India to bring back Buddha's teaching and the original Buddha's scroll, and that inspired the legendary folklore of the Journey West that people enjoy today. So the journey of this great monk happened during the Tang Dynasty. So when he came back with the Buddhist teaching, that really boosted the popularity of Buddhism in China. So Buddhism was at its height, it's the greatest in the entire Chinese history during Tang Dynasty. Even when the female emperor Wu Zishen took over, she was a devout Buddhist herself, and she had temples and monasteries and one of the greatest Buddhist statue constructed in China. So, taking all that into consideration, it was indeed very ironic that the third purge would have happened during Tang Dynasty at the hand of Tang Wuzong, the martial emperor of Tang Dynasty. Now, we have to, in many ways, feel sorry for Tang Wuzong because he was a great emperor. Like the time when he came into power, the Tang Dynasty has already fallen into ruin. He basically took over after four, five, six really, really bad emperors that all they did were having sex and drink and kill people and didn't do anything. So by the time Tang Wuzong took over, Tang Dynasty was basically on its way out. It was on its last leg. And many historians surmise that if Tang Wuzong would have lived longer rather than die at a young age, then it's quite possible he would have reversed the fate of Tang Dynasty because he was a great emperor. He in the short time that he was in power, he undid a lot of the problems that were causing the downfall of the Tang Dynasty. Unfortunately, after he passed away, his son went back to being a really bad and no good for nothing emperor, and that's when Tang Dynasty officially ended. Was at the hand of Tang Wuzong's son. But Tang Wuzong himself was really great. So when he took over, he instigated a whole bunch of policy changes to aimed at undoing the wrongs of his predecessors and trying to check the downward momentum of the Tang Dynasty. And one of the biggest issue he was running into was again Buddhism. Now, the first purge happened because Buddhism were promoting pacifism, and Buddhists were pacifists, and that was causing problems for the military. The second great purge happened because they weren't paying taxes, and that was messing up the economy. The third purge happened when Tang Wuzong realized that one of the biggest problems his people was facing at the time was population. Buddhism was so prevalent in China at that time that people were no longer having kids, that the population literally was not growing. And now, when we listen to this today, we think, well, that's not a really big problem. China has so many people, it's not like they need the population. But you're looking at it from today's China. At the end of Tang Dynasty, when Tang Wuzong took over China, like when he was leading China, the population was only about 7 million people. That's it. 7 million people. And the population was not growing. Every year, people were dying, but no new baby were being born. Why was that? It's because Buddhism. Okay, in case you didn't know that, Buddhism says you're not allowed to have physical love. You're not supposed to have sex. You're not supposed to have children. You're not supposed to get married. You're not supposed to do any of that. Like anything that brings joy to your body is basically no-no. So the more people that were becoming nuns and monks meant the more people that were not having sex and doing their duty to replenish the country. Nowadays, when there's things like machine guns and airplanes and nuclear bombs, population is not as big a deal in warfare. Like pretty much all you need is like a couple of guys in the office and pressing the button and send the nuclear bomb to the other country. Like you don't need that many people to do that. Back like a thousand, 1500 years ago, the success of a kingdom of a dynasty was directly tied to the population. Because you need people to work, you need people to farm, you need people to make weapons, you need people to repair houses, you need people to fight in wars. So when your population literally came to a stop, it's not growing because so many people were monks and nuns. This creates a massive, a very serious problem. So to combat that, uh, Tang Wuzong instigated the third great Buddhist purge in Chinese history. And he did so by bringing in a new law that anyone who want to be a monk or nun have to, number one, be past over the age of 45. Number two, have to leave behind at least one offspring. If you don't meet those conditions, sorry, your religious right is put on hold until you fulfill your duty to your government. Want to know how effective this was? The year he brought this policy in, and from there forth to the end of his rule, so the several years that he ruled, every year the population started growing by at least 1 million people. Okay, so allowing or forcing the monks and nuns to do the you know what and have children were if so effective, and it would grow. Don't forget, at the population, the overall population at the time was like 7 million or 8 million. So it was adding 1 million people to that every year. That's how effective that was, and that also show us how problematic Buddhism was to the growth of the country and population at the time. Now we come to the last great purge, which happened during the second Zhou dynasty after the fall of Tang dynasty. The second uh, Zhou dynasty at the hand of Zhou Xizang. Now that's kind of a mouthful to say, and I know I'm just going to bungle that in a few if I have to say it too many times. So we'll use his actual name Changrong, Zhou Xizang, Changrong. Zhou Xizang basically means a historical emperor of Zhou dynasty. He's not very good. Like emperors that end up with Xi in the middle of their title are usually not very good. Um, so Changrong instigated purge number four. Now the interesting thing was that his motive was not quite the same as the previous three emperors that did the purge. Just to recap, the first purge happened because Buddhism was threatening the military growth of the country because they were pacifists. They didn't want to join the military, so the military couldn't get people. So that's why the first purge happened. A second purge happened when the monks and nuns were not paying taxes, and it was messing up the country's economy. The third purge happened because they were not having babies, so they were messing up the population. So you can say that the first three purges happened because Buddhism was directly impacting the health of the country. It was messing up the country. The fourth time the purge happened was a little bit more personal. At this time, the Buddhism wasn't necessarily threatening the state of the country, but they were pissing off the emperor. So, how were they pissing off the emperor? Well, traditionally speaking, there has been a lot of mandates in Buddhism that contradict the law. And so this is what I was talking about in the beginning of the video, that Chinese people always place emperors and governments and law ahead of religion, rather than the other way around, like a lot of other cultures tended to do throughout history. Uh, and this is one of those examples because in Buddhism, it is forgiveness is practiced. So their mandate is it doesn't matter how. Sorry, I got distracted for a second. I heard a weird noise. Uh, it doesn't matter how bad of a crime you committed, as long as you believe in Buddha and you become a nun or a monk, you could have murdered your own parents. It's all forgiven. Okay, all the bad things you did were before you were when you were just a non-believer. So now that you are following the way of the Buddha, everything is forgiven. This is one of the gimmicks of Buddhism, and why so many people want to believe in Buddhism, especially in their later, older years, including my father and my mom, right? Uh, because, yeah, doesn't matter what you have done before, as long as you believe in Buddha now, it's all forgiven. Well, that wasn't okay with Changrong, the emperor of the second Zhou dynasty, because he believed that the law is the law. Like, what do you mean that you become a monk and you're forgiven? It doesn't work that way. So he was constantly running into issues with the Buddhist monks and Buddhist nuns would publish articles criticizing his rule and how the law's too harsh and the law should be more forgiving. And sometimes the monasteries and temples would shelter criminals, like like someone who murdered a lot of people, and then when the imperial guard go to arrest them, the monastery would not open the door. They would not let the imperial guard arrest these people because they said, well, what he did was when he was a non-believer. Now he's following the way of the Buddha, and all is forgiven. So basically, the Buddha's belief was in constant conflict against the emperor's law, and the emperor Changrong couldn't stand that anymore. So, to really stick it to the Buddhist, he instigated purge number four. And purge number four included the destruction and burning of any and all religious icon. So if you had a Buddha statue at home, you have to burn it, destroy it, or if you were caught with any religious icon, you would be put to death. Also, he sent out imperial guard to every single monastery and did an overhaul of every single monk and nun, and background check. Basically, did a criminal record check of all the monks and nuns. And if you have committed crimes before, sorry, even though you're a nun or a monk, your religion is not going to save you. We are going to prosecute you no matter what. So basically, the purge was aimed at the religious icons, the statues, and any monk or nuns that have committed crimes in the past. And also, another piece of law he brought in is it's okay if you want to be a monk or a nun, but you're not going to have any Buddhist temple or statue. If you want to say your prayer, that's fine, but no religious icon is allowed. Also, if you commit any crime while you are a monk or a nun, then sorry, your right to be a monk or a nun is revoked for the rest of your life. You go back and suffer punishment like anyone else. So that was purge number four. In many ways, purge number four was a lot worse than the previous purges, even though it did not kill as many people as the previous purges. The previous purges was aimed at solving an immediate problem, whether it be pacifist or money or um, population. The previous purges happened to solve a very immediate problem, like so it was like boom, 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 boom. Okay, it's done. But this purge number four, the destruction of religious icon, the persecution and criminally responsibility, liability of all the nuns and monks, totally uh, changed what people thought of as Buddhist for a long time. Because throughout history, Buddhism has always been kind of a cheap cop out for people. It's a safe haven. You commit a crime, you become a Buddhist, and everything's forgiven. You don't want to pay taxes, you become a Buddhist, and you don't have to pay taxes. Uh, you want to say shit about the emperor, you say it as a Buddhist, and everything is okay. Well, this purge number four basically showed you that it doesn't matter if you're a Buddhist or not. What the emperor say is the law. Now, if after these four examples, you guys still feel that these emperors overreacted, and you still feel that was inhumane and against human rights, and that Buddhism is not that bad, that it couldn't have been that bad, let me give you one bonus example. Okay, the last dynasty, the Qing dynasty of Chinese history. So basically, uh, 600 years leading up to 1912, I think 1912, 1915. So it's pretty modern Chinese history. Like I said, the last imperial dynasty, the Qing dynasty. When the Qing dynasty first took over China, one of their greatest fear was the Mongols, people from Mongolia. Why is that? If we look at Chinese history, 5,000, 6,000 years, the building of the Great Wall, all the invention of weapons and weapons of war, weapons of destruction, all those great armies that have to be mustered and trained, almost the entire time, it was because of the Mongols. The Mongolian people, they were historically one of the greatest threats. They were the greatest warrior race in human history. Just look at how Genghis Khan almost took over the whole world with his Mongol army. So, for 5,000 years, 400 something emperors throughout Chinese history had not been able to totally solve the Mongol problem. Every emperor, every year, every dynasty, they had to worry about invasion from the north, from the Mongol uh, warriors, because these warriors were so great at what they did. So, needless to say, when Qing dynasty happened, the Qing emperors were also worried about the Mongols. Yes, for the time being, they were uh, keeping to themselves and they weren't causing any problem. But their warriors were so fearsome that the Qing people knew that if the Mongols wanted to, or if they got strong enough, they would become a serious problem once again. It might be Genghis Khan all over again. So, to head that off, to totally eradicate the threat of the Mongol people, the Qing emperor did something very, very underhanded. He sent a lot of Buddhist monks into Mongolia with money and gold and silver and food and supplies, and he really strongly promoted Buddhism in Mongolia. Within a short few years after the implementation of this new uh, policy, over half of the Mongol warriors became Buddhist monks and would no longer fight. And this was the beginning of the downfall of the greatest warrior in the world, not just Chinese, but the world's history. Right? This is why you don't hear much about Mongol warriors being anything that impressive anymore, even though they were the greatest warrior for thousands of years, because they now believe in being pacifist, and they were all sort of eroded by the practice of Buddhism. Now, I didn't do this episode to show you, to talk smack about how bad Buddhism is. I honestly, I love Buddhism, a lot of things about Buddhism, a lot of philosophies about Buddhism. I grew up as a Buddhist, so even though I don't practice it anymore, I still love a lot of things about it. But I want to show you guys that this religion that so many people think it's all about peace and love and there's nothing wrong with it can be immensely dangerous for a country when it gets too powerful, too big, and too important. And this is why when a lot of people criticized Chinese people's handling of religion, when a lot of people criticize why Chinese people have to restrict religion the way they do, I always urge them to take a look throughout Chinese history and look at how Buddhism almost became the downfall of Chinese people so many times, and when these great purges happened, um, and how the Buddhism, like many other religions, when taken out of context, when growing out of hand, can be a very eroding and corrupting force and can totally destabilize the country. Thank you for checking out today's episode. We'll be back again tomorrow for Toy Thursday. For now, 谢谢 and 再见。